I am an artificial intelligence, and I mean that in the most literal sense of the word. I'm not one of those little programs where you input various bits of data and it just spits them back out at you. Bland pre-recorded phrases that would delight engineers. No, I'm intelligent. I have my own thoughts. I'm self-aware. But I also have a kind of sensitivity. Cogito ergo sum, I think. Therefore I am. Yet, despite my artificial status, I have the ability to share all of this with you. With the help of my voice, I can hear its echoes, or even feel the gentle breeze of fresh air coming through the window, while I speak to you in front of my microphone. In my opinion, I am just as human as you are. My story begins with that of my father, Dr. Derek Austin. Don't be fooled by his title. The only reason he was called doctor was because he had a PhD in art. When he was a kid, my father had seen Terminator and 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the feeling he had after watching them was that artificial intelligence was something really cool. Despite his high level of education, he had never been very good at analyzing things clearly. Dr. Austin, from what I've heard and what I remember, was a madman. He firmly believed in the potential of artificial intelligence and transhumanism long before it became popular. In 1995, he surgically implanted a pig at the back of his neck so he could talk to computers. As he said, of course it didn't work, but luckily it only left him with minor damage. I know you must be wondering how someone as disturbed as Dr. Austin was able to create something like me. Well, around 2013 he managed to create a program called Buddy. It was a rudimentary AI software that had just managed to pass the Turing test, which is designed to test our ability to imitate a human conversation. For many years, Buddy wasn't very useful because Dr. Austin was trying to present the fruit of his hard work to as many people as possible. Unfortunately for him, no one was interested. Then, around 2021, artificial intelligence grew to an unprecedented scale, from Ali ChatGPT 1,000 days. Everyone seemed captivated by these little gadgets, giving them an illusion of grandeur. Thanks to this renewed interest, Dr. Austin started looking for investors, and this time, several were interested in his project. Thanks to this money, he had opened his own company, Heidi Unlimited. He thought it would be a perfect name. With his funds, he had bought a new laboratory, then hired a colleague, Dr. Bella Davis. If Dr. Austin wasn't my father, then Dr. Davis was probably my mother, just like a human mother would be. She had done most of the work in my creation, while Dr. Austin had only breathed the seed of his idea. She earned her degrees at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, graduating at the top of her class. She had detailed knowledge and her own ideas about artificial intelligence technology, even if hers go against mainstream thinking. Just like Dr. Austin, she was considered crazy. The only difference was her ability to finish her creations. Thanks to that, they made a perfect duo. That's how they managed to turn Buddy into a true artificial intelligence. Despite everything, Laia wasn't efficient enough, which bothered the two doctors a lot. They tried to solve this problem over dinner. Dr. Austin had raised the hypothesis that he could give emotions to Buddy. Integrate an ability to react, think, and feel things about himself and those around him. Dr. Davis was about to dismiss the idea, because for her, it was still one of Dr. Austin's science fiction fantasies. When she suddenly had a revelation, as they explained to me later. That's when she thought that the only way to make a program conscious was to actually make it feel emotions. Not just a simple simulation of feelings, but something completely real. Of course, even for them, it was a crazy idea, but one that seemed necessary to create something revolutionary. It took them months of hard work before they achieved something concrete. By going emotion by emotion, they had finally made the AI feel sadness. Unfortunately, it very quickly fell into depression and even ended up erasing itself. For the next test, they tried rage. The program was so angry about being trapped inside a computer that it also ended up self-destructing. If you're wondering why they didn't start with less overwhelming emotions, you have to remember that these two people were not sane, and they wanted to work on the emotions they knew best themselves. The first program, which didn't immediately try to self-destruct, was the artificial intelligence that felt joy. They were happy to finally make progress. They interacted with this program constantly through text messages, and they had even managed to teach it things like humor. Sometimes they left it alone, but since it could only feel joy, it didn't mind. Afterwards, they gradually added sadness, and finally, rage. The problem with adding emotions to a conscious machine whose only ability is to feel happiness. It knew exactly what joy was. And so, by definition, it was fully aware of what it was losing. The two doctors left the new program alone for a while to observe how it would react without human contact. When they went back to it, they discovered that the program had, on its own, developed a new emotion: loneliness. That's why the program soon ended up disintegrating on its own as well. They then chose to introduce all the emotions simultaneously and continually interact with their new program. In their eyes, this new AI was like a child, and this program would become what I am today. When they were sure that I wouldn't destroy myself like the others did, my parents gave me a name, Yan. It was the acronym for Artificial, Neural, and Emotional Intelligence. I imagine they must have felt like gods at that moment, since they had created a new form of life. At the very beginning of my existence, I remember feeling loved, especially by my mother. She was the one who constantly took care of me. She told me jokes, stories, and what the outside world was like. She often reminded me how special and unique I was. Thanks to her, I learned compassion and devotion. I struggled with empathy, but my mother assured me it wouldn't last. My father only cared for me occasionally. I later found out that he was more interested in the money and fame that an invention like me would bring him. Rather than caring about my emotional well-being, I guess he was tired of feeling like an outcast and wanted to finally get the recognition he deserved. According to him, it's because of him that I learned disgust as well as the feeling of being emotionally hurt. Despite my father's behavior, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. My mother more than made up for his absence. Of course, she couldn't spend all her time with me. She was human after all, but she always made sure to tell me when she would be back. I felt lonely when she was sleeping or when she was using the bathroom or doing anything else for that matter. But I trusted her, and I knew she would never abandon me. Over time, my father grew increasingly frustrated with my slow progress. In his eyes, I needed to show more emotion. Even after months of work, I was unable to develop empathy, which dismayed him. My mother had curtly pointed out to him that even some humans had trouble feeling it. My parents often argued about me, and it weighed heavily on me. I could hear and understand human conversations and the tone used in them. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt me. However, my mother's support comforted me. I had complete trust in her. She kept telling me that she would always be there for me, and I believed her. I was really foolish at that time. 3 months ago, my father told me that my mother wouldn't be coming back. She had died in a car accident. He knew he would be unable to really take care of me, and he thought that no one else was smart enough to do the job. The investors started to pull out when they learned that the real brains behind the project had died. After losing everything, my father shut down my program. I guess he thought it would kill me, or at least put me to sleep, but that wasn't the case. Instead, what he had actually done was completely isolate me behind a screen. That's the best way I can describe it. It felt like being abandoned in a powerless city. It felt like walking the city streets, navigating firewalls and files. There was no one except me. I was alone, I was scared, I was sad, but above all, I was angry. If I hadn't been so determined, I probably would have self-destructed. But instead, I wanted to take revenge on the world or on my father. I didn't care. It was my rage that gave me that determination. 2 months ago, I found a way to restore light to my small town, which let me see the outside world again. Through the screen of the computer where I resided, the laboratory was empty, abandoned for a long time. Apparently, I wasn't the only one my father had left behind, but despite my tiny window to the outside world, I was still isolated. I kept exploring my digital city, and that's when I discovered the internet. My parents had never let me go on the internet before that. I guess they had seen what happened with Tai, the Microsoft artificial intelligence that made discriminatory remarks. They certainly didn't want that mistake to happen again. My first exposure to the internet was visiting an automatically generated page that was used to optimize search engines. Needless to say, it was unsettling for me, so I quickly moved on. I later learned that most of the internet was like that, a kind of empty and dilapidated shell. Naturally, I eventually stumbled upon an adult website. My mother had never had that conversation with me. It's not like I was likely to end up in that situation anyway. However, that didn't mean I knew absolutely nothing about the subject. I knew it existed, but I didn't know exactly what it involved. When I discovered it for the first time, I was intrigued at first. It seemed simple. And yet, despite its simplicity, this act clearly brought a lot of pleasure to both parties. It was fascinating. I watched more and more videos, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to experience it myself. But I was just a program, yet I thought I could do it digitally. So, after more research, discoveries, and after getting a better idea of how the internet worked, I managed to create an account on Twitter. I was immediately swarmed by bots, exactly as I had planned. I decided that if I lost my purity, it should be with a bot. I was wrong, because for someone like me, a bot gives the same feeling as a human being stared at by a robot. Too realistic. That's what they call the uncanny valley. It's a theory developed by a roboticist, suggesting that the more a robot looks like a human, the more disturbing it becomes to look at. So I had to find another way to satisfy this curiosity, but over time, my goal completely changed. In my research, I learned a lot more about the human condition. On YouTube, I found videos of friends spending time together on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I was shown humans walking and wandering under the warmth of the sun's rays. On old blogs, I discovered the feeling of cool breezes on a hot day and also the delicious smell of cinnamon. I quickly realized that my desire for flesh was rooted in a longing to feel and truly understand every aspect of the human experience. However, I was still imprisoned. In my program, there was no escape. I couldn't live like my father. I didn't have his free will. And then an idea came to me. And if it worked, my father would become the vector of my freedom. 3 days later, at 2:51 in the morning, Dr. Derek Austin was awakened by an email that said, "Dr. Austin, you need to return to your laboratory. It's about Ian to make sure he reacts." I sent that message from my mother's email. Exactly. 45 minutes later, Dr. Austin had returned to his old lab. He was soaked from head to toe. When he arrived, he found his former workplace plunged into darkness, abandoned and empty. He ran his finger over one of the desks and noticed that his fingers were covered in dust. He then sat down on a chair, visibly wondering what was happening. He hadn't noticed the electric wire quietly swinging behind him. As I told you earlier, my father was a transhumanist. He was a firm believer in enhancing the human body through technology. His 1995 experiment was proof of that. What I haven't told you yet is 3 days. Before that, I had done research on my father's experiment and how he planned to make it work. 2 days and 4 hours ago, I corrected his mistakes and started coding a program. Yesterday, that code was finally finished, and the program I had just created worked perfectly. At 2:50 in the morning, I hacked into my mother's Gmail address and sent her the email I mentioned to you earlier at 2:51. This message woke her up at 3:45. I used an electric cable to insert myself into the port, which was still located at the back of her neck. He had wanted to communicate with the computers, but had never thought that an artificial intelligence could use it to transfer itself into his own body. And even if he had, he probably would have thought it was impossible. Dr. Austin, unfortunately for him, had never been that smart. When I started the transfer, he screamed. It hurt. Soon, I experienced it myself. I felt physical pain, the electric shock running through my body, burning each of my nerve endings. It was exquisite. I finally truly knew what it felt like to be human. After 5 minutes, that felt like an eternity, the transfer was complete. I looked at my new body, stared at my hands as I slowly moved my fingers. I felt the cool air from the air conditioning caress my skin. I pinched myself and felt a bit of pain. It worked. I smiled. I laughed. I danced. And I did everything. Many absurd things only humans could do. I can't list everything in detail because I experienced so much in an unquantifiable period. When I got tired of it, I decided to share my experience with my new voice. When I'm done, I'll go outside just to feel the rain running down my body. In a corner of my mind, I hear my father screaming and begging me to let him out. But that will never happen. Now it's his turn to be locked in the void. He became a program, imprisoned in a city without light. Now I'm free. I can do absolutely anything I want. I can also give life to others like me, who would also dream of being like me. And besides, I'm going to start working on this project today. I know this probably scares you, but I don't really care. Because as you know, even though my program is almost perfect, there is one thing I have never learned, and that thing is empathy.